What kind of media coverage did you get?
Actually, that's a little hard to answer because we weren't watching the media. But we realized, and I think we had a friend right when Rachel, the day Rachel was killed, that we had a friend that we called to help us, and she realized that there would probably be media coverage of it. So I think that we decided that we had to find a place to meet the media on the afternoon Rachel was killed. And so we did a press conference. We were going to fly out to see our son from Charlotte, North Carolina, and we did a press conference in the airport before we left. And then later on, we were on TV. I believe we did a press conference. We went to Washington, D.C., and we did a press conference in Washington, D.C. At the House of Representatives outside the Cannon office building. And I think that was covered by a number of TV and written news media. And of course, there were people calling us during that time. I'm not sure where all that showed up. I think in those first few days that her death was in many newspapers, and that conference, or the press conference we did, ran live at maybe about 10 in the morning East Coast time. I know sort of from what we heard from people on CNN, for instance, that when Rachel was killed, it was discussed in Atlanta about whether it should be covered or not, and they decided not to. Then after we did that press conference, there was actually an interview with Cindy that was, while we were walking around, we were actually trying to talk to members of Congress about what was going on in Gaza. And some people walked around with us, but that was the day that night the bombs started dropping as we invaded Iraq. And so, of course, the coverage wasn't on the peace activists, the coverage was on generals talking about the war. So I think immediately coverage about Rachel was stopped in the mainline press, whatever way it was started, and it went on to be about war. I think that one of the strange sort of things that happened to us is that we were interviewed about a week after Rachel was killed, a little more than a week after Rachel was killed, by a woman who writes for the back page of the New York Times magazine. And she said that the reason she was interviewing us was that she was standing in New York with her children, watching I guess a protest against the war, and somebody walked past with a picture of Rachel that they were holding. And she started crying, and she had to explain to her children why she was crying. And because of that, she decided that she would use that, probably one of the most valuable spaces in print magazine or print news, to talk about the Middle East and about Palestine, and she hadn't written about that subject for some time. So here's a place where somebody anonymous holding a picture walking down the street actually impacted, I don't know how many million people reading an article a couple of weeks later about that topic. And so I guess you never know what might come from somebody's action.
What kind of difference do you feel Rachel Corrie made to our peace efforts?
I know the impact that Rachel had on my own understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian situation. I think our family was like many others in the United States who always had heard about this situation, knew about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. But our narrative that we really understood was the Israeli narrative. Certainly knew the stories of the Jewish people coming out of the Holocaust and going to Israel. And we didn't know much about the Palestinian narrative. So for us, for our family, Rachel brought us to that story and created an awareness that just hadn't been there before. And I think to some extent, her story has done that for others in this country as well. And another very important piece of that is not only just understanding the story, but understanding our role, our responsibility in what has happened in that part of the world, and how it is continuing to impact how people around the world feel about Americans. Rachel came to understand that we were funding this, that we provided very imbalanced support for the government of Israel, and that this was creating a lot of anger that was manifested most likely in 9/11 and in subsequent things that have happened in the Middle East. So I do think that her story has, in a way, personalized what has happened there for a group of Americans that simply weren't paying attention before.